This is Tommy's Outdoors 57, and I feel like this episode is overdue at least few months. I feel like I owe you that episode, because I know there's many of you out there who are waiting for the podcast about the Wild Deer Association of Ireland. The wait is over. That day is today, because I am pleased to bring you my conversation with David Dunne from the Wild Deer Association of Ireland. Oh, and before you go, please rate that podcast on the app that you're using to listen to this podcast right now. Whether this is an app on your phone or you're listening to that podcast on the website or maybe on YouTube, rate the podcast. Leave the comment, leave the review, click 5 stars, click like button. This is big help for me and for the podcast. And now, without any further ado, Wild Deer Association of Ireland with David Dunne. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me here, Tony.
All right, it's a pleasure to have you. It's been a while. I think it was like a first time over a year ago when I don't remember I meet you, but I met the guys from the Wild Deer Association of Ireland on the Rat Walk.
Yeah, and we finally got together.
Okay, so let's start just laid out for our listeners. Who you are, what you do in Wild Deer Association of Ireland, and maybe what a Wild Deer Association of Ireland is.
Well, the Wild Deer Association of Ireland was started up in 1981. It started off as the Southern Deer Society, and then it expanded and became a kind of national, because it wasn't just stalkers from down south that were involved. It became stalkers from all over Ireland. So that's when the name was changed to Wild Deer Association of Ireland. My role in the Wild Deer Association of Ireland is events organiser. Right. I am a former chairman of the organisation and have been involved with a lot of the butchery displays and butchery demonstrations and organising events for it, including range days and things like that. So I have a long history with the Wild Deer Association of Ireland.
For the famous butchery demonstration.
Yeah, the butchery demos are very popular. It's one of our most popular events during the year, is the butchery demo and our shoot. But in recent years, we've really upped the ante by increasing the amount of events that we run. And the year before last, we ran 12 events. Wow. That's nearly one event every month. Some were very successful, and some were just like testing the waters to see what the reaction was. The idea behind all the events is to actually bring in memberships, and that, because we are at present the strongest deer organisation with the largest volume of members at present, and we just want to increase this. And the Wild Deer Association of Ireland is a members' organisation, and if you are a member of the organisation, that gives you every much say as the next guy, and all your suggestions, while we have formed a committee, and we have a committee and a chairman, but as a member of the organisation, any suggestions or anything you suggest to us will be heard and will go in front of the committee. And if the committee agree to it and we think it should benefit the organisation, that idea will go ahead and go forward. Right. But only recently we ran a dog tracking event.
Yes, I was on one of those. I was on one of those. It was great because you could actually see how the dogs in the demonstration. And I think that one of the attendees actually brought his own dog.
That's correct. And Frank Byrne.
Yes, and
Frank and Neil.
And
they're some of the top guys in their field, and they really know what they're doing. And we're delighted to have them on board. And they really contribute to that event immensely. Number one, last year they brought their own dogs, and they just showed everyone that went to that event, they all walked away with a greater understanding and a greater knowledge of tracking of wounded deer. And it's only right that people do have access to a dog that can track deer, because sometimes, as you know, it's hunting and it's live animals. So if something does go wrong, that
Yeah.
you know someone who has a dog and that's trained to track and deer recovery. And Frank and Neil are top of their field in this. So, and it came back again this year. This year it was more a training day, and people brought their dogs, and people were just stunned at what the guys could get their dogs to do in such a short period of time.
Right.
What happens most people is they underestimate their dogs and that, but the dogs have a natural nose and a natural instinct, and with the proper guidance you can end up with a really good tracking dog. And that dog could be anything from a spaniel to a Jack Russell to a Bavarian bloodhound to a teakle to anything. Any dog with a good nose can track deer if given correct training.
That's right. And even though I don't have a dog, I was on that training and I took away a lot of knowledge. Because I know a guy who has a dog, and always in the beginning of the season, I give him a call and say, hey, remember our arrangement that if I have a problem, I'm going to ring you up, you're going to help me.
Yeah.
I never had to use his help so far, but even the simple thing, like you don't go to the shot site and put your shoes into all the sands, and then you walk around and then you're just going to confuse the dog. So even that was very, very important knowledge and learning for a person who doesn't have a dog like me. And
that is also one of the events that proves to be hugely popular. And as you mentioned earlier, the deer butchery and the demonstration and that, which I coordinate that, and those butchery events are hugely popular. We're doing it in recent years at the Midlands Range, and we incorporate a shoot along with the butchery event. So after the butchery event, we do disease identification, and we go through the whole carcass, and everyone there, and I have to say our committee is very strong and dedicated, everyone there is very approachable, and we're very open to questions on anything, and anyone that raises their hand. The only silly question, as we say, is the question that's not asked. And people just, once questions start coming, they can come hot and heavy, and we're only delighted that we're interacting with the people, and that we are there, and we will help them in any way we can, and we'll answer any of the questions, be it on disease identification, to the skinning techniques, to the breaking down of a carcass. All that is covered on the day, and I think we're the only organisation doing that at present, and it's, as I said, it's hugely popular.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Are there any deer diseases that are constituting danger to human?
Well, it does be a hot topic sometimes, is TB in deer. While it always brings up a heated debate between the farming community, the deer stalkers and everything. While I've been stalking deer in over 30 years, and my 30 years of stalking deer, and I stalk both Sika and fallow generally, with some reds involved, I've only encountered about 7 positive cases of TB. And that's over a large scale cull. So overall, what I'll say on the matter and that is that the national deer herd in general is healthy. And there's very low incidence of disease in deer. What deer can suffer from is parasites such as ticks, liver fluke, what you call lungworm, and that they're mammals and they can cover it. They also are very resilient, and even if a deer had something like liver fluke and you see all the scarring on the liver, and most of these animals will survive, and most of the parasitic things that deer pick up, they don't actually affect the quality of the carcass. If it affects the offal, it's only the offal that should be disposed of. It doesn't condemn the carcass.
So we don't have a danger that someone's going to consume the
danger.
meat and will get
as I
sick.
said, overall, the wild deer herd in Ireland is healthy, and by all accounts, it's growing in some areas. Some areas we hear stories of steep decline for whatever reasons, and other areas there is hotspots, and especially areas being fed by national parks and state forestries where deer are in high densities. These can actually spill out onto private lands and farm and private forestry where there can be an issue. So that's where culling and proper deer management comes in. And we at the Wild Deer Association want to promote the proper methods of culling, best practices, and then safe handling of the meat and safe handling of the deer.
Yeah.
And of course, we look at it as to be done as humanely as possible. And even at that, that's where the tracking event comes in for deer recovery. If something does go wrong, our members have access to a tracking dog for deer recovery. You know, like every stalker respects the quarry he's after. And best practice is to dispatch the animal as quickly and humanely as possible. And then the responsibility after the dispatch is it actually turns to food. And once it becomes food, the safe handling of that carcass and the methods in which it's transported to the larder and how it's prepared, this is done best practice, and it's done hygienically and safely. And that's what we're all about. Best practices.
Yeah, and listeners to this podcast can look up on YouTube. There are videos of you.
I have a YouTube channel which anyone can key me in, David Dunne, and I have loads of butchery demonstrations on field grollicking and skinning and other butchery tips. Back a good number of years ago, I think I was the first in Ireland to produce. I produced 3 films on deer management, and it involved the culling of deer, the butchery of deer, and the safe handling of deer. And back then, when DVDs were popular, they were a huge success. And actually, at the time, when I made those films, it wasn't for self-profit or anything. The donation was made to the Wild Deer Association at the time.
Great.
So all the profit from those DVDs was turned into the Wild Deer Association at the time, because the Wild Deer Association at the time was an organisation that I believed in.
Yeah, that's great, and it's great to hear. I noticed on those videos that your technique. What I noticed is your technique is you're not cutting around the anus.
No.
You're kind of cutting inside the carcass and you're leaving it. Because everything else that I saw is you start cutting.
The reason, Tommy, I do that is because the extraction of the deer, I keep the cuts to the minimum, and around the anus and things like that, I don't want any contamination going in there. So what I do is when I remove the green offal from inside, and I tie off that area, so no feces comes back inside the carcass. That's why it's been tied off. It remains inside till I get to the vehicle, and then it can be removed hygienically, and then no contaminants can come into that open area.
Yeah, you're right, because quite often you see those videos and you see the guy starts with cutting and they have hold their knife in the feces, and then you kind of wipe it on the grass, whatever, and proceed with cutting all the rest. And it's like, oh, dude, you have this knife. You should change the knife or something.
Yeah. But I think, like as I said, what we're about is best practice, and the methods which I show I keep it simple, and I keep it the introduction to it as clear as possible. So really, with a bit of practice, anyone can achieve the results I'm getting. All it takes is practice, and of course a sharp knife.
Practice, right?
That's it.
I'm not surprised that the deer butchering events are so popular, because I think this is the most intimidating part. At least for I'm very new, right? This season is my 3rd season when I started hunting. Probably listeners of this podcast are sick of me saying that, because I'm saying that all the time. I started as an angler, and I kind of naturally progressed after many years of fishing. I said, well, actually fishing is hunting.
Yes.
So I kind of moved, and for me, that was the most kind of serious part of it. And a lot of people think actually shooting the deer, taking animals' life is this most serious part. And it's not a small thing. But actually then taking proper care,
that's it.
It could be incredibly intimidating, and if you don't have somebody who show you, right? Because if you go with your buddies, or maybe your father showed you, you kind of know how to do it. But if you're starting on your own, well, it's like, whoa, how am I going to do this, right? So the first time is very intimidating. So I'm not surprised that a lot of people are interested in that.
Well, of all the sports and shooting sports in Ireland, the one that's constantly growing is deer stalking. There's at present, I think there's over 5,200 deer license issued by National Parks and Wildlife at present, and this seems to be growing on a yearly basis. So the sport of deer management and deer stalking is gaining popularity, but with the amount of new people coming into the sports, I think it's good to be part of something or part of an organisation where the likes of these events can show you and advise you. And as I say, our committee are all decent guys with a keen interest in deer stalking. And if they can help you in any way, everyone there will help you.
Yeah.
And we're the most approachable group going. Like, as I say, we have a really good committee, really strong chairman, and we're all about the promotion of the sport and presenting the sport to the public in a positive manner.
Yeah. So obviously, any deer stalker or hunter or beginning hunter, maybe even advanced hunter who is not a member of Wild Deer Association of Ireland listening to this now, they should join because they will have an access to all those events. These are members only events.
Okay, and for the cost of it, a yearly subscription to the Wild Deer Association at 25 euro, and the amount of events you get from that, and also we're contactable if there is an issue with anything. Say, even if you have a question on a carcass or you've spotted something unusual, you can contact us and we'll advise you. There'll be no bother. If you contact our secretary, he'll put in contact with me and you tell me your issues or your problem. You'll get good, sound advice from experienced people who know.
Yeah.
And that we have experts on our panel on the dog handling. We have experts on our panel on range and rifles and ballistics. And then we have myself there doing the butchery, disease identification and everything else. So what do you call it is for the fee that's been charged, you do get good value for money.
Yeah,
I definitely believe in that.
Yeah, no doubt. Listen, just to wrap it up, the subject of meat handling and carcass handling, what would be, in your opinion, one thing that everybody should pay attention when they're handling carcass? Like if you had to put like a one thing that is most important when you have a deer on the ground and you start, so what would it be?
It would be to keep the cuts to a minimum. The bleeding cut should be kept as small as possible, maybe 3-4 inches. That's enough. You don't have to cut across the throat or anything like that. The whole idea of carcass handling is to keep everything hygienic. And by keeping it hygienic, you're keeping it safe. So keep the cuts to a minimum. My advice is, if you're dragging it out, don't remove the bung or the anus till you get back to your vehicle always lift your carcass over water. If you have to cross water, do not drag your carcass through water or stream. That's contaminating it. And even a lot of guys, which will happen any shooter, it happened even myself, and that when a shot does go wrong and you end up the bullet passing through the green offal, and that another mistake a lot of people do is by washing out the inside of the carcass. It's the worst thing you can do. It actually spreads E. coli inside the carcass, and that's only spreading bacteria. While inside the carcass might appear clean, you're actually putting bacteria everywhere. So, as we say, don't wash, you trim. And if it does go wrong, and anyone that's stalking any length of time, a shot will go wrong. The animal will turn slightly at the last minute. Perfect broadside shot all of a sudden becomes an angled shot, and that bullet has gone down a bit and passed through the green offal, and they think by washing all that out the animal is fit. No, if that happens and the inside of your carcass is contaminated, the first thing I do is I would not use anything on the inside of the carcass, because you have E. coli, you have salmonella, all from the green offal, from bacteria inside the gut. So that's a mistake some people make. But as I say, one advice is keep cuts to a minimum and don't drag your carcass if you're removing it through water.
Yeah, that's a very good advice. I actually never thought of that. Tell me, is Wild Deer Association involved in any Is that what you do? Like any national campaigns or advocating in anything?
We do. We have in the past have run campaigns, and we have been involved in Shine Light on Poaching, which was a media campaign.
Yeah.
We ran another similar campaign just on the legalities of using night vision and thermal vision,
Yes.
and cleared up the matter and made it clear what laws are regarding using this equipment.
Yeah.
And that.
Can you lay it out for us? What's
Well, in Ireland, it's illegal to fit a night vision or a device capable of night vision onto a firearm without an amendment to your license.
Yes.
That means you have to seek permission to fit a night vision device or a thermal device to your rifle.
Okay, and then
that goes onto your
license.
pulse. So some people think it's a letter or something, but it's an amendment to your pulse. So if you hand in your license, which has a certificate number, and they look you up on pulse, there'll be an amendment to your pulse saying that you have been granted permission to fit a night vision device to your rifle.
Right.
It's not handed out willy-nilly. You do have to give good reason and good cause. Gamekeepers that do a lot of fox control work get it, but you'd have to put in a good case for it with your local superintendent.
But that's a device that's actually on your rifle that allows you to shoot.
To your rifle.
But what about the night vision binoculars, for example?
Night vision binoculars,
or even infrared that detects the heat.
That's the thermal. The thermal.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff is coming on board, and as you know, most of the laws in Ireland, they're always catching up, and this equipment is getting so readily available, it's coming down on price, and it's getting more and more advanced. It's taking a while for the law to catch up, but the only thing I'll say on the matter, once a device is fitted to your rifle, you need an amendment to your pulse to allow you to do it, and you have to apply for it. If you are caught using this device without this amendment to your license and permission being given by the local superintendent. Now, I must state that this permit is normally given for vermin control work. Yeah. It's not given for deer stalking.
Yeah, because you don't even, you can't even,
because,
it's not a legal light.
The law says that deer stalking takes place legally 1 hour before sunrise and 1 hour after sunset. So anything after that is considered nighttime shooting and that. So just to keep right of the law, my advice is if you want to get night vision and you want it for vermin control, go speak to your local firearms officer and he'll advise you on the route to go. Yeah. But as I said, if you're determined and you do a lot of fox control work, these devices are quite expensive and a huge investment, and that I'd speak to the firearms officer for advice first, and maybe even speak to the super and give your reasons for wanting one.
Sure. Because one of the advice I got is to get binoculars with thermal to find, if you can't find a deer.
Yeah, thermal spotters or thermal handheld are very useful indeed, especially in heather or bracken for deer recovery.
Yes, exactly.
And they have their uses and that. But as I say, the way the laws are, and there's amendments to the laws all the time, that it's if you want any advice, you're better off speaking to national parks or speaking to your local Garda station, and there is a set of rules regarding this equipment and that. So just as not to run foul of the law, I advise anyone that's considering purchasing these items to speak to national parks or speak to An Garda Síochána for best advice.
Yeah, sure. So we were talking about these campaigns that the association was involved. So that was one of them.
That was one of them, was just making people aware, and we researched.
And a shine light on
light on poaching is just that was to highlight poaching. Like, I don't want to get bogged down in poaching because, poaching has always been there and it continues to be, especially when people look at the deer as a commercial asset and it can be turned into cash. And anything that can be turned into cash, criminals will look at it in a different light. But it is there. But as I say, it's the responsibility of An Garda Síochána, which work on the laws that are already in place, and national parks and wildlife, responsibility to enforce the laws that already exist.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it is illegal to lamp and hunt deer at night time, and it is illegal to shoot deer from a public road. But the laws are there, and the laws are in place.
Yeah.
And while everyone knows the laws are there, everyone knows the laws are in place, it just goes back to enforcement after that.
Exactly.
You know, and we are not the enforcers.
Yeah.
We state the laws and that, but we are not the enforcers of the law.
Okay. Listen, I'm going to switch the gears here a little bit and ask you a few questions that I'm always asking when I'm talking people involved in some extent in the wildlife, and obviously deer is a wildlife. We don't know how many deers we have in Ireland, right? We didn't have a deer census. And you said that the number of stalkers are increasing.
Yes.
Right? And you hear different things. Some people say like, oh, there's more and more deer, and no, there's not enough deer, and like, we don't know. Like, what's your view on that? Should we have some campaign to actually campaign to have a deer census?
I know in Scotland they had a helicopter fitted with a thermal, and they actually did a count in certain areas now, and that count revealed accurate figures on the number of deer that's on the ground. My opinion at present, while a lot of areas deer numbers have come down, population has dropped due to maybe pressure on the ground from the increase in stalking and stalkers, or maybe the increase in the illegal taking of deer in certain areas, especially in rural parts of the country. But then there's hotspots where there's high densities of deer, which has been fed off of national parks and big quilcha forestries. And that's like a funnel, which is pushing deer out onto private property, farms and private forestry. That will exist. So while some areas, I definitely agree that the population has gone up, but I'll also agree that in some other areas, the population has actually decreased.
Yes.
A good example of this is I've been stalking over 30 years myself, and I used to, because it's so close to my hometown in Roscrea, the Kinnity area, and that I've seen a dramatic decrease in the deer population there, which is fallow. My reasons for it, like all the woods in the Kinnity area are leased out for stalking. There's a lot of new stalkers on the ground, and then there has been recorded incidents of the illegal taking of deer. And I find that area now, the deer population compared to say 10, 15 years ago, is definitely down 50 to 70% on what it was, which is dramatic. While I also hunted I hunt the Wicklow area, and I see there that there's a steady increase in the number of sika, and the area I hunt is actually being fed off of national parks and some of the big quilcha areas, and the deer are increasing. The only way, as I say to guys, while I don't condone trophy hunting, I think anyone that wants to go for a nice trophy, that's their business, and I say fair play to them. And it is lovely to set that challenge for yourself of passing everything and going for a specific animal. And it's a very specific skill to get an animal of quality. And I have nothing against trophy hunting, but I think every hunter has a responsibility to manage the females, and that. In some of the high density areas, like I was there during the week, and I went into one area, and the hind population is in one area is way too high. Yes, they need to come down, and the only way you'll impact on deer numbers is the proper management of the females. Yes, and that. Obviously. So it should be, if you have, it's very hard here in Ireland because a lot of the shooting in Ireland is given out by landowners and private shooting on the goodwill of landowners. Yeah. And while we all really appreciate it, we mightn't manage that piece of land on our own. So the normal attitude towards deer hunting is if there's 4 or 5 other guys hunting it, so if you were hunting it and if it's a male and it's in season, you take it. If it's a female, it's in season. There's no management plan.
Yes.
But if you have a piece of ground that you have exclusive, you should really look into a management plan. And if you want to bring on good trophies, proper deer management is what will bring on good trophies. If you take out anything that looks poorly or will never produce, as I call them, scraggly bucks or stags, if you remove them, if you take out old females don't generally throw a good calf and that, or a good fawn. If you do a management plan in an area that you have exclusive, the benefits to that area and the benefits for the deer is really good. One of the areas that I manage up in Wicklow, there is not enough grazing and food on that ground for the amount of deer there. So even last year, when the year we had the really hard winter, this really impacted on the deer, and dead deer actually turned up on the ground. And that's not good. That's not good when you see deer dying of exposure and starvation during the winter. So proper deer management benefits both the deer, number one, because if you have a managed population, as deer have no natural predators, it's our responsibility to manage the herds. And if they're managed correctly, that will benefit the deer, but it also benefits the environment. It benefits tree growth, it benefits shrubbery, it benefits you have to keep a balance. And that's what hunting is all about, finding the right balance.
Absolutely. Does it not worry you that, in fact, we don't have a management plan, like a national management plan? Because what you said is like, it's up to every, individual who have a exclusive, or maybe not exclusive rights to shoot deer on certain areas. But there's no, people might be incompetent. People might. So it's kind of a little bit worrying that we have a national wildlife and national parks who issues a license, but actually, it struck me when I was doing HCAP exam, right? Where the first thing is do your call plan and do everything that you're saying, best practice, know how many females you have, know how many stags you have, do the plan, and then you can call, right? That's the first thing they're saying, that you need to have a plan and you need to know population in the area. But then when we go on the country level, we have no idea what's happening in the country, and that's not really regulated because, ideally, when you're getting a license, ideally, maybe not ideally, you can comment on that in a second, saying like, okay, Tommy, where are you stalking? Oh, I'm stalking in Kerry area in this land, right? And they said, okay, in this land, you can take 1 stag and 6 females. And then it's kind of regulated some way by people who know what's up, are more experienced than I am, right? While at the moment, it's like, okay, here's a license, and Tommy can go in and can just do whatever Tommy wants, which is that not worrying?
There's no regulation on private land, and while a lot of landowners will absorb a certain amount of deer on their land and not mind, but when they go out onto their land and farms, especially if they have a field set aside for cattle or sheep or anything, and they go out and see 10 or 15 deer grazing it away, that's actually impacting on their income. And that's when wildlife impacts on incomes of private individuals, they just look at them not as an asset, to look at them as a pest.
Yes.
And that's where they'll say they want the numbers reduced, or some landowners want them removed. And so as most of the land in Ireland is privately owned, it's up to the individual who owns the land. He can implicate a plan if he wishes to. And he said, like, I know a few landowners who will say, you can take a few, and I don't mind, and I like having them around the place.
Don't shoot them all.
Don't shoot them all. You can take a few, and there's other landowners you can go, shoot them all. I want rid of them. And but that's my point. Yeah, but you see, on private land, the government nor the stalker has no say on privately owned land. And as we say in law, a deer belongs to no one. A deer is a free roaming animal and it belongs to no one. The only time it becomes property is when it's shot.
Yes.
And then you are now the owner of the carcass. But a deer itself is not owned by anyone. It's free roaming and that. So even though the landowner might own the land, he doesn't actually own the deer till the deer is shot and then becomes a carcass and then it becomes private ownership and that. So it's different attitudes. As I say, most of the land in Ireland is privately owned. So to put in a management plan and tell people what they can and can't do on their own private land, I'm afraid, Tommy, it's never going to work.
That wouldn't go down well.
It isn't going to work. Now, Cuilche, when you take out a Cuilche lease, they give you a cull and they tell you, okay, this wood here is up, 16 females, 6 males. And that's the cull given out on that area. Now, that, again, can be questionable as to the proof and the enforcement of this cull. And if it goes above or below that, it just depends. They're going on the returns from the stalkers and that. But there is an actual cull plan for Cuilche lets, and other private forestries are now getting into deer letting. I think Greenbelt let out woods now, and Vion Forestries, they're doing leases on woods. And some of the forestry groups now are looking at deer as an asset and that they can lease, get an extra income from leasing the sporting rights of these forestries and letting stalkers on. And actually the stalkers are doing them a favour by reducing the deer herd. So they're getting an income and they're also getting deer management done free of charge to them.
No, that's a very good point, David. You know, I'm all thinking like to avoid the situation when the areas will be just, you know, no deer at all. And then you have an area like in Wicklow, right, where there's like plenty of deer. That's what and obviously that's not an easy subject because, like you said, there's a private ownership comes into play, and then the farmers, you know, if they want to get rid of deer from their own land, then you're probably talking about some sort of a compensation schemes if they have a deer on their land.
No, they don't have.
But I'm saying if we, you know,
if they did,
if we impose like a national management plan.
Well, there was the National Deer Management Forum where relative bodies got up and meet and discussed a national deer plan. But I think that's gone for over 2 years now, and there was some good suggestions and good ideas. There was bad ideas, of course, and that. But it seemed to have faded away. But in some areas, what's happening now? What I've noticed, there's deer in areas where there was never deer before. They're turning up. But if deer get under pressure in one area and they're being pushed out, and there's deer turning up in areas where there was never deer, we're getting phone calls from places that never seen a deer ever, and if all of a sudden a farmer's going out and he's seen deer in his land, and in his lifetime he's never seen deer there. So if deer are under pressure, they will be pushed out into other areas and that. And also, if deer become pressured, especially the Sika, especially from morning to daytime stalking, they become completely nocturnal. And this makes it very difficult to do any management. In problem areas, national parks and wildlife, especially in the Wicklow area, are issuing a lot of Section 42s with an attachment for nighttime shooting. But again, this isn't handed out too easily. You really, it's up to the wildlife ranger in that area to see if this ground has the number of deer that it's claimed to have, and that they are doing the destruction that what is claimed to be done. And then, pending on that information, a Section 42 will be granted. And then a person with a Section 42 must have completed a course, be it HCAP or the DTC level 1, which is the alternative to HCAP. They must have that course.
I think that HCAP is becoming mandatory from next season. Right.
They're talking about that. It's coming up. It's not going to be mandatory. It's coming up for review.
Okay.
It's coming up for review.
I know that the new
we often
stalkers, they now, if you're applying for the first time for a license, I think you have to.
They're
have a
on
hedge
about it, but nothing is written in stone. And
Okay.
I often get questioned on this.
Yes.
But as I say to people, it's best to have some kind of a course done, and the courses aren't expensive, and anyone that does the course. I'm involved in the DTC1 training course, and anyone that comes to these courses will walk away with a greater knowledge and greater understanding of deer, the legalities, and everything. So there is benefits in doing it, and when it becomes mandatory, they'll have it done.
Yeah.
While I'm not telling them it's going to it comes up for review soon, and then the powers that be will decide whether they will make it management. But with such an increase in deer year on, I think that there should be some form of formal training for anyone with the amount of high-powered rifles.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just on the grounds of safety, I don't think anyone should be with no knowledge or no shooting experience should just go get a permission note, go get a deer license, get a high-powered rifle. I think there should be, my opinion, should be some form of training. While in the past it was passed down maybe from your father, or you went out with friends that did it and you kind of were introduced to it that way. But there's other guys that said, I want to go deer stalking, and to get permission. And I think to those people, some form of training, and be it legalities and best practice and suitable firearms, all this information is available at these courses.
Yeah.
So there is benefits in taking the course.
I absolutely agree with you. And actually on my YouTube channel, Tommy's Outdoors YouTube channel, I make the two-part video series on the HCAP exam, where I'm actually going through like how useful that is, and how useful I found it to have it, to do it. And on the exam itself, the guy who was on the range test, the guy who was next to me, he couldn't group 6 inches. 100 yards prone position.
Yeah.
So I thought, like, I don't want this guy stalking on the same land as I am, because it's like, if you can't handle firearm in the basic kind of manner, it's like, it's just dangerous. Very dangerous.
It's dangerous. And then on the grounds of humanely dispatching the animal, like there should be a minimum standard of required marksmanship, that you can humanely dispatch an animal at a given distance.
Exactly.
And
you have your muzzle control, what you're doing, and all this stuff. Absolutely.
And from doing that exam, the guys at the Midlands range are only too willing to help and advise on the day. No one wants you to fail your exam and that, but as I say, it is best that you do some form of relative training, especially if you're going to get into deer stalking and you weren't introduced to it by maybe your father or through friends and that.
Yes.
But that there is some form of training, and how to identify deer, males, females, everything. There's some guys that just don't understand even the legalities of it. And that, So as I say, all forms of education regarding stalking are positive.
Yes. David, we mentioned, we waded into the subject of farming and private property and all that. So maybe on that note, what do you think, as a hunter and as a, just thinking, wishful thinking. There's a lot of talks about rewilding. Would you like to see wild boar and wolves being back on the landscape in Ireland? Now there's two parts to it. Like, would you like this to happen if you would live in a hypothetical world? And then number two, do you see this actually ever happening?
Well, I'm lucky enough to have hunted in Slovakia, Poland, and Ukraine, and I've seen the destruction that wild boar can do. And my opinion is Ireland is so heavily dependent on agriculture. And I think if you introduce a species that has been extinct for quite a long time, and agriculture has evolved a lot since that time, I think the impact on an introduced species could be detrimental to farming. Like I've seen what 4 or 5 boar can do to a field overnight. They can literally turn it upside down. So you can imagine some landowner going out to his field of corn and 8 or 10 boar after being in it all night. It's mayhem. It's absolutely mayhem. And of all the invasive species that I think could establish themselves really quick in Ireland would be the wild boar, because they can breed and have such large groups at birth, with 8 to 12 being quite possible.
Exactly, it's 12. The litter is up to 12, and they can have like a 2 or 3 a year.
Yes, they can establish themselves very, very quickly. So
just look what happened in Texas, right?
I know, and it's a major issue.
Yes,
it's a major issue, and invasive species do impact on the environment, on the economy, and then when their number becomes too big, they actually impact on themselves. So while me as a hunter, I really enjoyed hunting wild boar, but I can't be so selfish as to say the benefits of having them here just for hunting outweigh the costs of having them here, if that makes sense to you, Tommy.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially that even if you're talking about enclosures or anything like that, they will escape.
They will escape.
There's no, especially boar, which they just going to go through the fence
They're unstoppable, and there already has been wild boar shot and recorded in Ireland.
Really?
Where small groups were, There was wild boar shot in Wicklow, there was wild boar shot up near Clonaslee, there was wild boar shot in Cavan, and there was even recordings of wild boar crossing laneways. So there is a risk and a high risk factor.
Is it going to happen anyway?
Yeah, if wild boar released into, say, Wicklow International Parks where there's no shooting going on, they could establish themselves quite rapidly. Like the other invasive species that have turned up occasionally, the likes of the muntjac.
Yes.
Now muntjac, while they're very secretive, and if they were introduced, every year on year off, there is reports of muntjac sightings, and there has actually been a small number of animals actually being shot.
Yeah.
Here
well, you even
Ireland.
have it on your license that you can shoot them all year.
Yeah,
it's
you
there
can
for the
shoot them
reason.
all year.
As
I say to people, you have a better chance of coming across a leprechaun as coming across a muntjac. about equal opportunity on
so
board.
For all those who are hoping to go hunting in May for muntjac.
Yes, everyone, I've had several people saying they sighted muntjac, but usually ends up being either a fox or a fawn or something, and that there has been animals shot, and there was a roadkill of a muntjac up, I think it was around Kildare somewhere. So it's quite possible they exist, but they're not in any notable numbers. And lately, you probably heard they're on about reintroducing wolves.
Yes.
Again, I'm thinking of Ireland's agriculture and economy. I can't see the benefits of introducing species like a wolf. I was so shocked when I actually stood next to a wolf at the actual size of the animal. People
don't realize, right? People think it's like a dog.
It's no dog.
Far from a dog.
And when it yawned, you could literally fit your head into its mouth. It is quite huge, and it has, and it's well capable of taking cattle, calves, and sheep. Definitely calves and sheep, and that. Whether that's sustainable or an answer, my opinion. As a hunter, I'd love to see him here, but not being selfish, I think the impact on domestic stock and agriculture would be negative. So
yes.
I think...
But the argument is like if you're, like you mentioned, like Wicklow area, there's like way too many deer. So one of the arguments, you put a wolf there and they kind of going to regulate the number of deer.
Well, they did that in Yellowstone Park, and they did have now they have a healthy wolf population where now they're actually issuing tags for wolves every year to manage the wolves, and it was kind of a success story there.
Yes,
when the elk become too populated. But that's America, and that's over a vast... Yellowstone Park is about Ireland.
Yes, exactly. And this is what I saw a tweet. I think someone was trying to be very smart about it and do this comparison. And we're talking about the Yellowstone Park. It's like, well, no, the Yellowstone Park is a one thing, but we're talking about the so-called Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is actually the size of Scotland.
Yes.
Right, it's the size of Scotland, so it's like we can't really compare.
We can't compare. They don't compare.
Yeah.
So I think if we manage the animals that we have here already, I don't think invasive species is the answer. Yeah. And just going by history, invasive species generally have a negative effect where they're introduced. As we know, Sika were introduced into Ireland. Lord Powerscourt introduced Sika into Ireland, and now we have Sika. We have Sika from the north to the Midlands, going right down to Kerry. We have Sika everywhere. Yeah. It isn't just confined to Wicklow area. Yeah, so we have Sika relatively north and south. The same with red deer.
Yeah.
A lot of the reds.
I love Sika.
I think they're amazing animals, and they're one of my favourite animals to stalk.
Yeah.
But we also have reds. When back about 20 years ago, when red deer became popular to farm, and then that venture failed, and a lot of red deer escaped and were let off, and that introduced different breeds, Bulgarian reds, Hungarian reds, which were brought in for their size and mass, and that for meat production, and they were released into the countryside, and like they're in Mayo, Galway, Sligo, all areas. They turn up in Tipperary. There's some in the Midlands, Laois. Reds have turned up anywhere, and these are introduced things. As we said, the reds, at least down in Kerry, have always been there, and they're native reds. And the population down there is becoming quite high. And then it goes back to national parks for the management and culling of them. It's up to the powers to be that this is culling. See, as I say, deer have no predators. They need to be managed, and management is the responsibility of the people and the stalkers on the ground. It's also the responsibility of the landowners whose property these animals vacate. So it's best. That's why the Wild Deer Association, it's all about best practice, and we're here to, as I say, we're here to advise. And if anything we can do to help our members, or any question, the only silly question is a question that's not asked. That's what we always say. Put up your hand, ask a question, contact us, ask a question. With the panel we have in place at the moment, your question will get a correct and proper answer, be it from our deer stalking experts to the legalities of it. We have people on board that will answer and give you best advice.
Yeah. I want to connect now three subjects where we spoke about wolves, we spoke about reintroduced red deer, and I was talking to gamekeeper in Poland, I think it was 3 years ago, and I was showing him photos of red deer from Killarney National Park, and he said, oh yeah, they're okay, right? And he was showing me pictures of red deer from Poland, from Bieszczady Mountains and so on. And I asked him, why do you think that deer in Ireland, they're not so big, they don't have, what are they missing? And he straight away said, predators. Predators. They're missing predators. That's why
the biggest and the best survived.
Yes.
And only the biggest and the best survive. And the biggest and the best is the best breeding stock.
Yeah.
And as I said, what I noticed even on the last time I was at the Red Deer Rut Walk with ourselves down in Killarney, there's a lot of deer. While people were saying how nice they were, I was thinking that should be removed. That should be culled. That spiker is very poor quality. That should be removed. Yeah. And that if you have the biggest and the best there, it's natural
to survive the harsh winter, survive the wolves and all that.
And so what do you call? Even though the red dominant stags will fight and the strongest get the most females, there's always a spiker that will sneak in and take his place when his back is turned, and that. But you also have the impact that the Sika, while there's no real evidence of hybridization going on in Kerry yet, but if the poor quality deer, and if you end up with smaller deer, smaller females and younger calves coming into use earlier in the year, that's given the Sika more opportunity to breed with them because they're smaller. They'll be able to cover them easier. So it's best that the deer be kept healthy, big and strong as that, because small, weak ones, a Sika stag will cover.
You know, a question about this. You know, the all the Sika in Wicklow, right? Maybe not all, but most of the Sika in Wicklow. You know the Will the Huntsman on Instagram?
Yes.
I was, he's posting photos of those Sikas, and I look at the mass of the antlers, and I commented on one of his photos, I said, hey, Will, is that the hybrid with red? And he said, no, Tommy, he's pure Sika. And I'm not an expert, but I'm looking at a Sika doesn't have a mass like that.
It actually can be determined by measurement. Any of the guys that measure heads, the guy like Larry Taff from CIC, he will measure and take a measurement from that head, and that will determine whether it's Sika or red, because reds naturally have a longer face and a longer head, but there's a certain measurement that can be taken from that head which will determine whether it's Sika or whether it's hybridized. So you're saying that the mass
of the antler is not a good indicator?
Like Wicklow is famous for producing really good Sika, but while there is a lot of hybridization taking place, they reckon there's no natural reds up in Wicklow now, the hybrids. If you go at any one time to the Glenademal area and the military grounds, you'll see all the hybrids up there.
That's what I'm saying, and that's what I heard, that is this the same way there is no pure Sika, and even though they're, you can measure it, but there is a little tiny part of the red deer blood in them, because if
usually in reds, the track that crosses over is the tail and the colouring around the rump that passes over in the reds, and then in the reds what passes over with the Sika is the V frown and the glands on the hocks. That will pass over. If you see a hybrid, it carries both, and the distinct facial features will be on both. But as I say, if you brought the head and you wanted to know whether it was a pure Sika, an expert, someone like, as I say, Larry Taff from CIC, he will tell you fairly quickly, and his measurement is quite precise, and he will tell you if it was hybrid by taking a measurement, which it has to fall into a certain category. Now, I myself am not a trophy hunter. I keep very few trophies. A trophy to me is a memory, usually of something good that happened or people I was with. It's not about the mass of the antlers. I have shot some very worthy trophies in my over 30 years of stalking, but the heads I've kept are quite modest.
Oh, really?
Quite modest heads, and they just bring me back to a time where I was with good friends, or I took a really good shot or something, and that's the memory attached to it.
That's a common theme. That's really what the trophy is. The history of
you
it. Look at this and you, like you said, you remember what happened on that.
The memory.
Exactly.
That's it. As I say, I never class myself as a trophy hunter. While I have nothing against trophy hunting, and trophy hunting to acquire good trophies is a dedication, and you pass on a lot of animals waiting for that one noble animal that you want to call a worthy trophy. And that it's not for me, but for some people that's what they're about, and I've no problem with that. That's it. That's a different kind of sport, trophy hunting. Sure.
Listen, and then finally, do you feel like, so I give a little bit of the intro to my thought. I've spoken a lot with people who are very much onto rewilding, and this is a subject of boar and wolves and so on and so forth. And part of me feels like hunters should be close to that subject, and the reason being is that if the introduction of wolves or lynx or whatever other animal will finally happen, if hunters not gonna be kind of involved in the process from the very beginning, then they kind of gonna be, left behind. They will have no say. And that brings me to kind of the feeling, and I'm sure you have that, or maybe you're gonna comment in a second, that hunting as a lifestyle and hunting as an activity is kind of under pressure, it's kind of under scrutiny. There is more and more of these anti-hunting movement, and people who, they're coming often from, lack of information, lack of exposure, lack of education. But that doesn't matter if their mind is closed, right? And so what's your comments on that? Is that what you feel as well? And what
I definitely do feel that the hunting community is becoming under pressure. Like a good hunting Facebook page might acquire membership of maybe 4,000, which is a good hunting page here. That's a good number of people to be on a hunting page. But if you go into any of the anti-hunting pages, even here in Ireland, you'll see 16, 20,000. So it's beginning to look like hunters are in the minority. Most people
but they are, right?
They are, without a doubt, Tommy. Without a doubt, the hunters are in the minority. So that's why I'm saying it's our responsibility to portray what we do correctly to the public.
Yeah.
It's not a bloodlust. It's not this thing to kill, and that it involves a few things. It's for some people it's tradition. Their family, their father hunted and his father hunted. It's traditional. Some people just get into it and they like the outdoor life, and they like going out and harvesting their own meat for the freezer, and they want to know where their meat has come from, that they've done this, they prepared it, and they're feeding it to their family.
Exactly.
And that's a very positive way of looking at hunting. But it's our responsibility to portray hunting as not just recreational or not just a sport, but it's a way of controlling deer numbers. It's a way of providing food for our families, and it's a way of looking after the environment and the habitat in which deer exist on.
The habitat, I think the habitat is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. And that's why I'm kind of keeping close eye on, these talks about reintroduction of wolves and so on, because these are impacts on the habitat. And, I would love to see deer organizations, stalkers organization kind of talking about it. Even like, let's talk with the likes of Irish Wildlife Trust, and even for the perspective to have the voice, just to, be there and like, hey, these are hunters, and they're also kind of talking about it.
But that's what I also say to hunters. I says, if you come on board and join an organisation, and with the Wild Deer Association, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have a voice, and your opinion will be heard, and your opinion will go in front of a committee. And if it's a good idea or a good proposal, it will go forward. But if you're just sitting in the background and complaining that nothing is done about this, nothing is done about that, we as a hunting organisation are a voice for hunters, and for the members that we have, I feel at the moment we're representing them really well, and we're providing services for them with butchery days, giving advice, running things for them, and so as I say, don't be on the outside. The more people that are in organisations, and the bigger hunting organisations become, more of a voice. Yeah. One person has no say when you go to speak on something, but an organisation with numbers can impact. And that's when laws are made that interested bodies, or bodies that represent hunting, or interested parties are invited to these. So, as I say, instead of complaining that nothing's been done or this, join part of an organisation, and that give your opinion. You have a voice. There is a committee. Your proposal will be put forward, and if it's a good idea, it'll be adhered to. Yeah. So That's the idea of deer, just
That's the worst
to promote
thing, right?
everything.
To sit in the back seat and complain. That's the worst. That's the worst thing.
That can be a bit. There can be a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of that. But as I say, we are in the minority. But even as I say to guys on Facebook, by all means, if you want to put up a post of an animal that you harvested, make it eye appealing. Do not have gore shots.
Yes.
And do not represent the hunting with gore and blood, and that present it well.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's, you know, this is a story I've looked up. Obviously, when I was starting, you know, I was looking at all the photos that I can, because I'm analyzing them and looking at it. And I'm scrolling through my Instagram timeline, and I see the photo, and my first reaction is like, "Oh my God, what happened there?" Like a bloodbath, right? Oh, right. And I'm looking at that photo, and I see, okay, a shot placement is perfect, right? And so I'm looking at it, and clearly the deer was hit straight into the heart. It dropped on the spot. Obviously, all the blood flowed out of it. That's why it looks so bad. So, from the humane perspective, everything is perfect.
Yeah.
Great shot placement, quick humane kill, animal, like great. But visually, it's horrific. And people who are just scrolling through Instagram, they're not gonna do this analysis like, oh, what is the shot placement?
No.
They just gonna see like, oh my God, those bloodlusting, subhuman, epithets that, and that's why it's important. Like, okay, show it to your buddies who you know what they know what's up.
Yeah.
But if you're putting that in public, just that makes this bad name for hunters. What is this?
As I said, gore shots, head shots, things like that should never be in the public forum. And that, you know, and if you're going to present something, present it well.
It's not nice. Let's face it, it's not nice. Get
behind it, hold it. If there's blood on it, covered with a branch or a piece of grass or something, and present the animal well, harvest it. If its tongue is out, put its tongue back in its mouth, present it well, and make it easier for the public. But as I say, the way it's gone, we hunters are in a minority, and the anti-hunting is gathering paces with some extremist groups coming on board. We have hunt saboteurs and all this thing going on, and they're gaining ground, whereas we're losing ground. And but a lot of it is lack of education and lack of understanding. And as I call it, some of them suffer from what's called Bambi syndrome. Now, like we all, even us hunters can admire the beauty of a live deer. And it is a beautiful and noble animal. And especially, there's nothing more noble than a huge big fallow buck or a huge big Sika stag or a red stag. They are noble and beautiful animals, and we all admire them. But at the same time, it's a responsibility of people, not just hunters, of people to maintain, number one, numbers, to make them acceptable level for farming, agriculture, forestry. And that, and also the number reduction benefits the deer, and the proper culling of the deer benefits the herd. That. So, but a lot of them just think we're out just killing deer and that, but it's not so simple. So, we hope to bring forward in the future more educational and make it open to the public and discuss what hunting and deer management is about.
And that's why, you know, in this podcast, I'm not shying away from any outdoors subjects, right? And I'm talking, you know, equally to people who are, you know, working with wounded animals and equally with hunters and so, you know, because I think that ultimately it's outdoors, right?
Yes.
And it's called outdoors. So I hope that even if there's a one person who kind of, you know, will be open up to another ideas, it's great. And look, when I talking to those people, I was talking, I think a year ago, to a lady from Irish Wild Rehabilitation Ireland, right? And, you know, they rehabilitate foxes, for example, knowing good and well that they're going to spend a lot of time and effort on bringing fox back to the environment, and that fox can be shot the next day, right? And I had a great conversation with her, and she wasn't really like a, you know, anti-hunting, whatever.
No.
It was like understanding. So I think the more people are actually doing something with wildlife, are actually going out, they're more able to understand the nuance. You know, the worst thing is like when someone sits just behind a computer and never saw a deer and never saw anything other than a rat and has a strong opinion about this or that, you know.
Without ever, as I said, there's always both sides. And but a lot of people come on board, as I said, due to Bambi syndrome and that. But if they actually listened to someone who knows what they're on about and the reasons behind it, and there is genuine reasons, not make-up reasons for a bloodlust, genuine reasons as why this is required to be done, they would form a different opinion.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah.
And what they call, we do get questioned on from people, non-hunters, as to why and what, and we always give them an honest response. An honest response, and hopefully we make sense and get through to them that this is required. This is required. It benefits both agriculture, the economy, the hunter, and road users.
Yes.
Like, that's becoming a problem. And even recently there was it made headlines in Agriland about TD calling for a serious cull in Tipperary due to road traffic accidents. That's
serious. Like,
it is serious.
It's a serious when a deer, you know, you hit the car,
goes through the windscreen.
There could be like 2 dead people in that car just because that deer just went through the entire length of the car.
Road traffic incidents are becoming more frequent, mainly due to the fact of deer are being spread and turning up in more areas. So those accidents are becoming more frequent, but I don't know of a fatality yet. But there is a lot of accidents taking place where deer have been struck and damage to property, which is you'd feel sorry for the driver of the car. His car is damaged, and ask him after that what he thinks of deer. You know,
exactly.
He won't be happy.
You know, just to wrap it up, when I attended Rot Walk, and it's obviously great educational event, you know, my feeling after that was it was great, but that information was passed to all the people who already knew that. Are there any plans to go out to non-hunting audience?
We hope to, what we're about and what we're thinking, and I propose it even to our chairman today, is further an education as into what we do, and especially young people. Young people are the future.
Hunter recruitment.
Yes, whether they become hunters or not, young people are the future. Hunting should not be closed to anyone, and should be an open and welcoming door, especially to young people. Because without the young people coming on board and people being introduced, it will fade away. It'll become, and otherwise what my worst fear is, it'll become exclusive, or it'll be only up to contractors. It's good while they increase in it, but any young person that has an interest in deer stalking or getting in and finding out what deer and deer management is all about, and I think the future of deer stalking in Ireland is education and broadening people's minds as to what should be done and how it should be done, and the reasons for doing it. And I think if we bring the young people in on it and young people on board, I think that's a very positive thing for the future of the sport.
Absolutely. David, to wrap it up, tell us how people can find Wild Deer Association of Ireland, where to find you, and how to get involved and how to become a member.
Yeah, no problem, Tommy. You can find us on Facebook. We have an open page, and on the open page, under the heading of shop, there's a PayPal facility there, and you can join there by just paying through PayPal and giving your name and address. And then your proposal will go to our committee and you'll be approved, and a membership card will be issued, and you'll be updated on all future events and any deer-related matters. And that. We also have a website that has just been constructed and it's almost complete, and you can visit our website and you'll get a lot of information as to what we're about. It's been added to on a weekly basis, and you can look at that. And we run a series of open events as well, and you can come along and meet the people, and you'll see most of the people there are absolutely top-notch people, and who are only too willing to share and answer any question that you might have. And as I said, the Wild Deer Association of Ireland now is a members' organisation, with each member having a say into its running, and their opinion is always welcome.
That's perfect, David. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, no problem, Tommy. Pleasure.